Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and this is going to be a Heel Heat Top 10. The topic of this Top 10? Top 10 wrestlers you didn't know were in ECW. And it's a little bit of a misnomer because a couple of these actually weren't wrestlers, but they were in ECW. So, with all that being said, let's jump right into it. Number 10, I combined this one because of that exact reason. They're not wrestlers. Jenna Jameson and Jasmine St. Clair. Two of the, how can I say it, most prolific adult entertainers of the late 1990s. Two women synonymous with the porn industry. Both had their runs. Jenna Jameson came in for a couple pay-per-views. Jasmine as well. Jasmine St. Clair managed a revamped Blue Meanie as the blue guy for a little while. So, kind of a weird combination at the time. Extreme was being extreme, and nothing more extreme than a couple of porn stars being involved in the product. Next up, number 9. You may know him as Farouk, but we knew him back in the time he was in ECW as Ron Simmons. Ron had a couple little runs in ECW. He never stayed around for a while. He'd come in, do a few shows, and then go back to either, I believe it was WCW at the time, or he did a little run before he went to WWE as well. Nothing too big, nothing major. Kind of right before ECW really started gaining popularity, so that's why he's not remembered as much as being part of the show as he was. But one of the guys that helped build and lend credibility to the product. You had a former WCW champion, tag champion, a guy that was well respected, and he's on your show. So it lended a lot of credibility for him to come in and do what he did. Now, our number 8. Sid. Now, you may or may not have remembered Sid. He came in during the TNN era of ECW when it was starting to be on. It was still very popular, but it wasn't as innovative as it was maybe a year or two earlier. It started to be, basically, the WWE had taken the ECW formula and made it the Attitude Era, and kind of, at this point, we're a little bit doing it a little bit better with better production, better style. They took the wrestlers they wanted from ECW. Sid was there in a weird transitional period. He didn't last very long, but he did make a memorable impact. I was actually at the pay-per-view he debuted on, Guilty as Charged. I believe it was 99 or 98. I might be wrong on what year, but it was the one in Kissimmee, Florida. Taz loses the world title to Shane Douglas, which I believe that had to be 98 because 99 Taz was already in WWE, so I digress. Anyway, just a weird year, a weird situation, a weird transitional time, so he kind of gets forgotten that he was there. Now our number 7. We all know the contributions that Terry Funk made to ECW, but did you know that his brother Dory Funk was called upon on the early days of ECW to help him out? He brought Dory in to help him feud with the Public Enemy, and, Dory wasn't as known as a hardcore wrestler as Terry. Yeah, he had did some of it. He was more what you would say your technical mat-based wrestler. But he came in, and the Funk Brothers and Public Enemy had a memorable feud. It helped really put the Public Enemy on the map. It helped make them stars. They were one of the first homegrown stars in the run of ECW, and this was one of the ways they got him over, was feuding with Terry and Dory Funk. The Funk Brothers, who at that time were already legends in the business, helped him with the rub. A lot of people talk about Terry. They don't really mention Dory as much, but Dory Funk absolutely showed up and absolutely helped out in the early stages of ECW to help some of the young guys get over and become stars on their own. Now, speaking of young guys, our number 6. At some point there became a talent exchange between WWF, or at the time, and the ECW. And one of the guys that was sent to ECW to work on his game was Darren Drozdoff. Droz, a.k.a. Puke, whatever you call him. He got sent down to ECW for a bit, got a little bit of seasoning, was called back up to the main roster. Unfortunately, his career had a lot of promise. It ended on a freak accident, but I think he really could have been something special. I really enjoyed Droz. I thought he was cool. Sans the whole LOD 2000 gimmick, I thought him, when he was allowed to be himself, was way better than that gimmick, and not even the puke thing. That was just weird. I mean, famously, you got the Beyond the Mat scene where Vince is interviewing him, and he goes, he's gonna puke. And it's just weird. I understand it's wrestling. Weird stuff's going to be on there. But I thought the guy had a ton of talent. I thought he was a star on the rise. You can even see that in the ECW, where he was one of the guys, I think, that they really... Maybe if he would have stayed there for a little bit longer, it could have made him a little better. I don't know that we would have ever avoided him having the weird injury, the freak accident, but I just think he was someone, he's one of those guys that probably is a what could have been. I think he could have been a bigger star. Unfortunately, the accident and the ring kind of hurt that. Now, going to our number 5. During the ECW's run, there was a lot of times where they actually sued WCW for either breaching wrestlers' contracts, different things here and there. One of the settlements on one of the lawsuits was that ECW got to use 2 WCW talents for a show. And they brought in Arn Anderson, who teamed with Terry Funk, to go against Bobby Eaton, who teamed with Sabu. That's why we're putting them together. They came in for a show called When Worlds Collide. It's one of the ECW tapes, when I still had VHS tapes, that probably got the most play. I was a huge fan of Arn, a huge fan of Eaton. Being a fan of ECW, it really was one of those points where really anything could happen. Obviously, both guys had ties to Heyman from being in the Dangerous Alliance, so that's why he wanted to bring him in. They came in as a favor, put on a hell of a match, on a hell of a show. I don't think that maybe it's on some of the shows, the ECW shows on the network. I know the whole When Worlds Collide isn't a show on the network, but I believe you can find it on the weekly shows that happened during '94, so check it out if you can find it. A really good match, really fun to see 2 of the guys who are really the huge stars in the 80s come in and helping out ECW here. Now, going from huge stars in the 80s to a guy that was probably absolutely the antithesis of ECW. Our number 4 guy, Doink the Clown. Yes, folks, believe it or not, Doink the Clown appeared in ECW. Weird as it may seem, Matt Bourne brought his Doink gimmick to ECW after he was let go by the WWE. He had run-ins with 911, and then he actually took it and made something very interesting. He became Born Again, which was kind of half face painted, half in doink gimmick, half in Matt Bourne, and kind of a split personality thing, which was very interesting at the time. Unfortunately, he didn't last too long in ECW, didn't stick around long, but he left a memorable thought in it, and like I said, the antithesis of what you would think of an ECW wrestler would be Doink the Clown. I mean, he is the exact reason why, and people like him, and no knock on Matt Bourne or any of the other guys that played Doink. They were a product of a system. That system had become antiquated. ECW came in and showed the wrestling world, look, we're no longer, the cartoon gimmicks aren't going to work. The Duke the Dumpster jerseys aren't going to work. The Doink the Clowns aren't going to work. The gobbledygookers, the El Gigantes, they're not going to work anymore. The fans want to see a more realistic, more violent product, something different than what was being given to us, and that's why this was kind of a surprise. Now, our number 3 was another one of the blink and you'd miss them, but for the last few months of ECW, one of the stars who's still a big star today and kind of led the way for the 2000s and 2010s, especially in Ring of Honor and TNA wrestling, Christopher Daniels actually was signed for, I believe, 2 months, somewhere around there. I believe he made actually 5 or 6 appearances in ECW. I know he got on at least one show because there's a match with him versus Rhino that you can find. I know it's on YouTube. I've seen it there. But you can see, and I've heard where Paul Heyman was talking about Daniels being one of the guys he was going to bring in and groom to be the next generation of ECW stars. He said he had his eyes on some of the Shawn Michaels Academy guys, which would have been Spanky, Brian Kendrick, Paul London, American Dragon, Bryan Danielson at the time, and a couple other guys, Michael Shane, Hot Stuff Hernandez, or Hernandez as you know him from LAX. So he was already looking towards the future. I know from watching the CM Punk DVD he had already heard of CM Punk, so maybe ECW would have stayed around a couple more years. We would have seen a transition to these guys being the stars, Christopher Daniels and Bryan Danielson, basically the guys that became the stars of early Ring of Honor and early TNA. But that would have been really cool. I think it's really cool that Daniels got that. And he's a guy, I think he's one of the most underrated wrestlers of all time. But I also think he's one of the most talented wrestlers of all time. And never really got his due. I'm glad he finally won a world championship when Ring of Honor gave him their world title this year. I love Christopher Daniels. And I would have loved to see him, what he could have done under Paul Heyman. It's one of those things that you wish you could have seen something like that. It would have been like a master general passing it on, his knowledge, to another master general. But with that being said, we're going to roll into our number 2. This one probably is a little bit surprising to a lot of people too. Lita. Lita was in ECW as Miss Congeniality, or Angelica. She went by both names. The valet love interest for Danny Doring and Roadkill. Love interest more for Danny Doring. It's funny because if you go back and watch, and I watched it at the time, how weird they're talking about Lita. They're talking about her as she's a rat, that she's a whore, basically. And this is Joey Styles saying stuff like this, so it's weird to think that this woman wrestler who would trailblaze and blaze away, and you could see it there. She was doing moonsaults and getting involved in the matches there. You could see glimpses of her being something great. But it's weird to think of where she went from where she started. I mean, she was almost a throwaway character on ECW. I mean, and she's someone that's in the WWE Hall of Fame now. But it goes to show you that everybody has a beginning somewhere. Lita's was in the bingo halls and rec centers and local gymnasiums with ECW wrestling. Now, before we get to our number one, if you've seen the show before or this may be your first time, we do a little thing called Best of the Rest. Basically, it's people that just barely missed the list but were considered when we were making the list. This one, I'm going to give 4 guys that came in early in the Eastern Championship Wrestling era of ECW that kind of, helped to sell those early shows. The early shows were more of what you would expect your typical indie of the 90s. Before Paul Heyman got there, they would bring in guys that had been name talents in either WWE or WCW at one point and kind of sell, see this guy along with all of our guys. And they'd have guys like Sandman and Dreamer on the undercard when you would have guys like Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert on the top of the card. But 4 of the guys that they brought in that really helped them stand out were King Kong Bundy, a WrestleMania main eventer, and a guy that had name recognition and credibility in the Northeast. Guy that gave them that instant cred that they could bring in a big guy like him and have someone that meant something on their show. Another guy, Don the Rock Morocco, a WWE mainstay, a former Intercontinental Champion, a big star in the Northeast. All these guys basically were that I'm mentioning here. A guy that was beloved in their core group, the Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey. In the time they were there, this was more basically Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware is where they would wrestle out of. So Morocco, Bundy, and then of course Jimmy Superfly Snuka, another guy that had a big following in the area. And last but not least, for the best of the rest, Road Warrior Hawk. Road Warrior Hawk came in and did a couple shows. Famously no-showed a few other shows, so he brought his name recognition with him, helped to build that product, which is what eventually got us to the ECW we knew and loved. With that all being said, before I get into number one, if you think I left somebody off the list, if you think I put something down too low, up too high, or you would just put someone else altogether on here, let me know. Hit us up in the comments, hit me up on my Twitter, on the Facebook, and make sure to hit like and share. Our number one person that you did not remember being an ECW or did not know was an ECW, Razor Ramon, a.k.a. Scott Hall. Well, he was Scott Hall in ECW. He wrestled, I think, 2 shows, maybe 3. And it was one of those things that they barely showed a clip of it on TV. You had to order the tape off of RF Video to watch him actually wrestle in ECW. I think he wrestled a tag match with Justin Credible. It slips my mind who they wrestled, and I know he wrestled Big Sally Graciano in a one-on-one match. But it was after WCW had fired him, and it was just weird. He would come in and do a couple shows, and then he was gone. It's one of those things that, being an ECW fan, you remember, but you kind of go, was he really there? Was Scott Hall really there? And there's picture and video evidence that he was. But it was just a surreal and weird situation that a lot of people don't know that he actually stopped by and did a little short stint in ECW. And probably one of the biggest stars to do so, either, with him, guys like Sid, Terry Funk. Mick Foley would become a bigger star after ECW. Steve Austin would become a bigger star after he left ECW. But probably the biggest star they were able to get to come in and do a show, other than maybe Dusty Rhodes, was Scott Hall. And he did a couple shots, and that was it. One of those weird time frames in life that if you were in the crowd for those shows, it was probably really special. For the rest of us, it was just a weird head scratcher, kind of like seeing the videos of AJ Styles wrestling on Jacked or something of that nature. But just a weird time, or Okada in TNA. Just weird time, like, you can't really believe it happened, but it did. But basically, that's all I have to say on this. My name is George Coles, and this has been a Heel Heat Top 10.